and good evening. Thank you very much for coming along on a nice hot evening. This is part of a series of events for Royal Television Society called The Anatomy of a Hit. And if you hadn't heard about it, it's simply an opportunity to shake and rattle what happened to make a mega hit, and to talk to the writers, directors, producer, actor. And because Line of Duty is a perfect fit. It started in 2012 on BBC Two and took off. We were all there talking about it. Eventually got to BBC One for the last series, won an RTS award, sadly missed BAFTA the other night. Yeah, I agree entirely. I'm very disappointed. Yeah. Anyway, who cares? It's got more than 7 million viewers. I mean, it's fantastic. Original, spine-chilling, quirky, scary, and what I love is there's humour in it too. So we've got a grand cast here. We've got Simon Heath, who is the creative director of World Productions. We've got Priscilla Parish, who started as a script editor but co-produced by Series 4. We've got himself here, Adrian Dunbar. At home we call him Mother of God now. Superintendent Hastings. And we've got the star Jed Mercurio, unheard of probably, writer, director, producer, everything in it. So I'm going to start with you, Jed, so we can learn when it became a germ of an idea.
Well, that was something that started quite a long time before it actually got on air. I'd developed some stuff with World Productions, a production company, back at the time when Tony Garnett was running it. And then Simon came aboard, and we kind of were maintaining a conversation about doing some kind of police series. And that then led to the idea of doing something about police corruption, and then after that it was really about what form it would take. And those were all decisions where I would describe it as being a kind of evolutionary process. There wasn't a point where it was something which just arrived fully formed. The idea of it being serialised, the idea of having a guest lead in each season, having the investigators return, all those things were part of a process that we eventually arrived at.
Was there any sense that the establishment and corruption within the establishment was important? Was that part of the idea?
Well, I think that if you look at the TV landscape, it's sometimes quite difficult to sell an idea based on the fact that it's important in the real world. I think that actually if you are saying that this makes it distinctive, that so many police series are what Tony would describe as the drama of reassurance, where honest, tenacious cops catch bad guys and the bad guys go to prison, then that pretty much describes most of the output in that genre. And probably the last series that significantly dealt with police corruption was also a world production, Between the Lines. So it felt like that was our USP.
And from the idea that it was going to be a series about police corruption and policemen, what came next?
I think it was the idea that we wouldn't have out-and-out villains and out-and-out heroes. The idea that the first so-called antagonist, the first allegedly corrupt officer, Tony Gates, was someone who had good and bad about him. He was in a moral grey area. And then the same applied to the investigators. They weren't holier than thou. They had their rough edges too. That felt like it allowed us into a more sophisticated, mature explanation of why public servants sometimes fail to act with integrity.
I mean, that's one of the brilliancy, because whichever series, there are times when you feel very sorry for the villain.
And that's intentional.
It's brilliant.
I mean, in a way, it's a departure from the real world, because most corrupt cops you wouldn't feel sorry for. Most of them are just greedy bastards. So, none of our antagonists act out of greed. They're all acting out of some kind of perception of a moral imperative. And that allows the audience to sometimes take sides with them.
Yeah. What was the big challenge after you decided on the series and he was there to write it, Simon?
Getting the BBC to commission it. Yeah, I mean,
They were your first port of call.
yeah, I mean, broadly, we went in. You know, I felt it was a very strong pitch, but it wasn't a great time for drama. It was around about 2008, 2009, and we're all sitting here in different events talking about the golden age of drama and all this drama being made by Netflix and Amazon and more stuff on Sky and so on. But certainly during the particular time we were going in to talk to the BBC, drama was seen at best as a lost leader by the broadcasters. So we knew we had a challenge on our hands. But
what were you pitching specifically?
At that point, I think Jed had written a couple of pages, but we went in and we were talking to the head of drama, Ben Stevenson, at the time. And what was clear was that he was immediately sold on an idea of doing something that was about the police as opposed to just a crime show that was a detective and a dead body. You know, he was interested in, if you like, interrogating the institution of the police. So that was helpful. But again, if you cast your mind back, at that point there was very, very little drama on BBC Two. BBC Two's drama money had migrated across to BBC Three, and clearly the sort of show we were talking about didn't fit with their brief for much younger audiences. So it was a question really about whether we, with our sort of, you know, our grey moral areas and our police looking in on itself, whether that was going to sit comfortably on BBC One.
Were you asking for BBC Two, or didn't you mind if it was BBC?
I think you get what you're given, don't you? You know, we were grateful for whatever, but it didn't. BBC Two, from memory, didn't appear to be much of an option at the time because there just wasn't the commissioning of series television on BBC Two at that point.
And were you worried that it was BBC Two and that it wouldn't catch the audience perhaps you really wanted?
Well, no, because I think, you know, you have a belief that the audience will find the show and that we felt that, you know, we always felt that we wanted it to be a thriller. You know, in different ways, Jed and I had done social realist dramas, you know, whether set in the world of the legal or medical. And you know, we wanted some of that element of commentary about it being about something in the real world, but we really wanted it to be a thriller as well. So you had to watch for 6 episodes to see how this thriller would resolve, and it would kind of invigorate an audience.
So you got a deal on 6 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, it was a process. You know,
Yeah.
Jed wrote the scripts, you get notes from the BBC, it evolved, and of course the interesting thing was that as the script was developed and sitting, waiting for a decision, we were fortunate enough that a new batch of money came online for BBC Two. So suddenly, from thinking we were,
Where did
you know,
the batch of money come
well,
online?
the magic money tree, I believe it's called.
Has this got a connection with Northern Ireland, where it's...
No, in fact, because the first series was actually shot in Birmingham, which is
Okay.
where we always wanted it to be, because we're from that neck of the woods. And it very
Adrian
rarely gets on the
isn't from
TV.
Birmingham.
No.
No.
He's nodding his head as
He
if
was
he's
our
from
honorary drummer
Birmingham.
for the series.
Let's just say we've shifted a lot of curry over the years.
So, I think from memory again, some of the money went back from BBC Three to BBC Two, as it often does. There's only a certain amount of money at the BBC, of course. We're dealing with a licence fee, it's a finite amount of money. And some of it was shifted across, and it was Ben Stevenson who said he wanted, you know, BBC Two to be making more of a splash with drama, and we were one of the, you know, not the first shows, but one of the early raft of shows that were commissioned for the New Look BBC Two.
Priscilla, as creative director in those early days, what was your involvement?
He's creative director.
Oh, is he? What were
I
you
was
in the beginning?
script
Script
editor,
editor.
yeah.
Yeah. What was the challenge at the beginning of that?
It was marrying, I came on in season 2, I wasn't on the first season, and I was immediately drawn to it when it was transmitted, and then Jed got in touch. It was the moral ambiguity of the characters. It was so fascinating to me, but it was marrying that to this brilliant thriller shape over 6 hours and sustaining those twists and turns. I don't know anyone who does it as well as Jed, really.
So before there was any Northern Ireland money or anything to shoot there, you already had Adrian
We did.
from Northern Ireland.
We did.
Yes, that's right. In fact, I could sit here and actually take a lot of praise for actually dragging the show over to Northern Ireland. But I won't, obviously. You know,
How
I
did
won't.
they
That was
sell it
something.
to you?
It didn't sell it to me at all. I went for an audition and I met with a couple of really nice guys. And, you know, we talked about it and talked about the character. And I said, well, you know, a lot of guys who had worked in counterintelligence and stuff like that in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s made their way across into mainstream UK police forces. But to be a head of a unit like SE12, you know, it probably would have, you know, been useful to be someone who was on the outside of things. And that was further kind of reinforced by the fact that he wasn't from the kind of, you know, if he had been in the RUC in Northern Ireland, which was kind of 96.5% Protestant, and if he was a Catholic, then he would have been on the outside of all that as well, which makes the whole Masonic line of thinking also quite complicated within the show.
Well, puzzling,
So,
actually.
and puzzling. And it hasn't been resolved
Well,
yet. And that's
are
quite,
you a Mason?
that's
Ian?
quite, sees.
I don't think you're
I'm
allowed
not,
to ask that question.
I'm not, you're not allowed to ask that question for a start, and I'm not at liberty to answer it.
In creating the character, I mean, it's just all those expressions of yours that, like Mother of God. That,
Yeah.
Were they in the original script, or have you enhanced scripts?
Well, I think both Jed and I have kind of, you know, Jed's got a great ear for what's going on on the street, and you know, listening to what people are saying, and these things creep in, and I kind of add a little bit here and there, and we kind of tease it out between us, and you know, it's just developed over the years that he has that kind of, you know, angle on things.
And the flaws in that was very important, that he had flaws in his character.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the idea that the investigators won't be holier than thou. And also, I think that was something that became particularly important to us once we were recommissioned for our second season. Because at that point then, the only returning characters were the investigators. And there was a conscious decision that we should dig into their characters more than we had in the first season. So therefore, we started to create more of an architecture around their home lives, their relationships, and in season 2, we kind of fleshed out a little bit more about what Ted was like outside of work. And that was something that we've just carried on doing.
And then in series 2, those who appeared in series 2 were then in series 3 as well. You carried on, didn't you? I mean, you took characters from...
I mean, that was something that we did right from the beginning. So in series 2, we had characters, as well as the 3 investigators. We brought back a couple of characters who'd appeared in series 1. Most significantly, I suppose, was the character of D.I. Cotton, who'd had a role in the first season, had been one of the team that Tony Gates ran.
Yeah.
And then
Neil's character, Neil Morrissey.
And then Neil Morrissey, who was also part of that. And so we found ways, hopefully surprising ways, of including them going forward. And then in series 3, we kind of did play a little bit of a trick in terms of the antagonist from 2, Lindsay Denton, ended up coming back in 3 in a way that had been surprising. So yeah, that's always part of it. It's a great position to be in when you've got this kind of history of characters, some of whom are still around to come back.
And the Lindsay Denton was amazing because the viewer really didn't know for a long time what was what, and you know, how guilty she was, or was she guilty, or it was a very, very cleverly written.
Well, it was deliberately contrasting to how we'd played things in series 1. In series 1, it was all very open, that we were with Tony Gates through his travails, and so we had an idea of what was going on with him. But the investigators were playing catch up. With Lindsay, we closed it so that she had secrets which the audience wasn't allowed to know and didn't get to know until towards the end.
Priscilla, how do you think women have been treated in Line of Duty?
About the same as men, I would say. Lindsay has a pretty tough time, but she's such a terrific character. I don't think that, they all have a tough time. Everyone has a tough time and goes through it. I love Lindsay Denton because she was just so intelligent. She was cleverer than anyone. It's brilliant.
And allowing Superintendent Hastings to never show his feminist side.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, again, that was something that was kind of interesting in terms of the subtlety of workplace sexism. You know, there's a lot of cop shows that still do the thing of having someone be overtly sexist in a way that is just so stupid. You know, you're just going to get up in front of HR and be out of a job. Whereas if you are sexist, then the way to do it is very subtly. So it was a way of doing it with him, which left room for interpretation. And again, it goes back to that idea of grey areas. Is he someone who is sexist, or is he someone who has a certain way of expressing himself that means no discrimination against women?
Really?
Well, that's the point. It's if you look at his approach to women in the workplace, I don't think he's sexist towards certain female employees, and then others are accusing him of being sexist in a way that appears to be correct, that he is guilty of it. But what he isn't doing is that overt, out-and-out sexism where you can say, yeah, that guy's bang to right sexist.
Simon, do you have a favourite moment? Or a favourite part, or a favourite something that happened?
I mean, there's lots and lots of moments, really. Yeah, and you remember them on the journey. And sometimes it's when you watch the show go out, so I still always watch the show going out live. But equally, I can remember seeing moments in rushes. You know, I always go back to the first season, shooting the first season in Birmingham, and the first big interview scene with Lenny James at the beginning of episode 3. And you know, it was a very long interview by the standards of those days. A very long interview by the standards we now set. It was a very short one, but there was still a nervousness about how would it come out. And I remember seeing the rough cut that the editor put together at the end of the week that we'd shot it, and thinking, my God, this is just brilliant. You know, Lenny at the top of his game, Adrian, Vicky, and Martin at the top of their game, and it starts to define the show and those interview scenes, and seeing how well the audience then responded to those longer interview scenes, I think became a sort of touchstone for later seasons.
You've got a clip from season 1.
Got a clip from season 1. Yeah, this is another one of my favourite moments, and it relates to Adrian. And I think it's a moment for me that really announces Adrian's character. It's about midway through the first episode of the first season.
I'd like to determine the conditions of Tony's suspension from duty.
Oh, no, we're not asking for a suspension at this particular time. We don't think he's a threat to his fellow officers, and indeed the public in general. No, why should the citizens of this country be denied his selfless service? Interview terminated.
Very generous of you, sir. Looks like you found your level, Lana.
Tony, let's not descend.
Nobody plays me. Sir?
You never detected the lateral because you didn't even look. I recruited you because you took a moral stand against your colleagues despite the personal cost. You're a born AC-12 officer. Why don't you just start acting like one?
You dropped me into an ongoing investigation. Now, you could test me, or you could actually brief me.
Okay. Tony Yates cherry-picks the crimes that are easy to solve, then he dumps the rest. Then he invents a whole series of additional charges that never make it into the courtroom, but boost his clean-up rates. Laddering. That's how Tony Yates is covered.
Well, he got where he is because he had to be twice as good as the next bloke.
What? So what are you saying? To be corrupt, he's got to be twice as bad?
No, sir. Victimisation of a black officer.
Oh, hang on a second. Don't you talk to me about victimisation. What are you saying? Let me tell you something, son. Me and my best mate, we went through basic training together, okay? First year out, they sent us on this particular job. The two Catholics, are you with me? We go straight over a pipe bomb. I end up in intensive care. Him, they bury. The logbook goes missing. Nobody says a word. Don't you talk to me about victimisation. Nobody's blacker than me, son.
Oh, scary.
It's
Scary biscuits.
you know, it's one of my favourite lines from that first season, and I think that little interaction with Martin encapsulates a lot of the stuff Adrian was talking about. How you know, a Catholic police officer from Belfast ends up working in anti-corruption, and a modern young police officer like Martin is very worried about accusations of victimisation. And Adrian's character comes right back at him, and I think it felt like a scene you wouldn't see in another cop show, and it felt like it dealt with the sort of politics of race within an institution like the police, and in fact it was I think Jed will correct me if I'm wrong, but from memory it was a scene that came quite late in the writing process. It was after we'd cast Adrian and after we'd cast Lenny. And it was probably one of the very final drafts that Jed did before we shot the first episode, and it was it was embracing the fact that Tony Gates was a black police officer, and questions would be asked about the nature of AC12's investigation into him, and I thought it just captured it brilliantly. It's a brilliant piece of writing and brilliantly played by Adrian.
Yeah, it's interesting also that in Northern Ireland, to say that someone's black, in that respect, either Protestant or Catholic, means to have died in the wool something. That's what it actually means. It means you're dyed in the wool something. So it's got a slightly different connotation in Northern Ireland than it might have elsewhere. It's an interesting one, that particular riposte that he gives him. Yeah, it means like dyed in the wool completely. Yeah.
Adrian, do you think your character, looking back from the first series, if we looked at a clip later, my choice on series 4, do you think you've changed?
No, I don't think the character's changed. I think he's become more of what he is. I mean, I realise that some in the middle of everything, it's to do with acting as well. You get to a point where you realise that what audiences are interested in essentially is performance, and also to see someone going through something, and because they're going through something, so they're looking for someone who's kind of the litmus paper, if you like, to suggest to them where morally they should be, existing on this kind of big, scale of morality that we're dealing with in the grey areas. And you can see sometimes that he struggles in the grey areas with things, and he struggles with, that he comes from a different age, if you like, and he hasn't moved with the times, and that business we were talking about earlier, about the fact that Vicky comes to him and says, why don't we go for a drink, sir? Which is a really interesting thing. How does a young, female cop go out with if it's a young policeman, a young male, that's no problem. But for a younger woman to go out, then people start talking, so it's a really difficult process of getting close to the people who can actually help you up the scale, and then Ted ends up saying, I might as well be hanging out with one of Pan's people. So he's ended up, I think it's been a great trip, because he is that character in the middle of it all that kind of a lot of people are bouncing their understanding of what's happening off, if you like, and it's great to play that, because it's a very fine place that you're existing in, in the acting of it. So it's exciting to play it. It's a real gift, it's a gift.
Priscilla, has there been times when the four of you have disagreed or debated heatedly about something?
Jed's always right. It's just as simple as that.
I couldn't, but it's better. I actually can't think of a time where we've massively, heatedly debated about things. I think we agree.
It's not really how the process works. I mean, we discuss things, and if someone feels that something isn't right, then we just keep talking it through, and often that's
whining. Sometimes there's whining.
Yeah.
What's that?
Sometimes there's whining. It's like, oh.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're the
really
only
going to
girl,
do that
that's
to
the
that
point.
person?
You know, of the four of you sitting here, your perspective might be different on things.
No, that really is this is quite cohesive. We do tend to have the same vision for the show, and because there is so much communication, and there's such a clear development process on every episode over quite a long period, there's no real opportunity for big clashes and shocks.
When you're writing, how much are you researching? How much have you had to go out to learn how police officers behave?
Well, with series 1, I did a bit of research. You know, I read material about real policing, and then since then we've had advisors who've been really helpful.
Has anything surprised you that they've advised?
Well, what tends to surprise is the slackness. So you kind of...
For example?
Well, it's just the fact that we had a sequence in Series 4 where a police officer tampered with evidence. So I'd assumed that that the evidence room had security cameras fitted, so coppers can't fiddle with evidence. No. So it was like, I'm just thinking, hang on, seriously, you don't have... No, because there are no members of the public in an evidence room, and we're workers entitled to our privacy. We don't want cameras on us when we're not dealing with members of the public. So there are no security cameras dealing with that. So things like that surprise me.
And it was interesting. I remember the reaction on Twitter to that moment was, well, this is nonsense. They would have cameras. She would have been caught. And, you know, you wanted to...
So we ended up having to explain it. I mean, we had Adrian's character actually say that he'd written a very strong letter on this subject a number of times to the Chief Constable.
That's right.
Or to the Police Federation.
Police Federation.
Actually, to the Police Federation, saying that we are public servants and our conduct should be open to public scrutiny. Yeah. That was the voice of the author. But
And have they taken you up on that?
The Police Federation?
Yeah.
You try talking to the Police Federation, see how far you get.
Is your opinion of police different to when you started?
No. I mean, fundamentally, no, because the evidence is exactly what I think we all know it is, which is that the vast majority of police officers are dedicated public servants who are in it for the right reasons. Yeah. They want to protect the public. They want to protect life. They want to see justice. There is a very small proportion who are corrupt in different ways, and that was so the scale of police corruption hasn't changed in my perception. Yeah. There are certain forces which have networks of corruption, and there are certain forces which have done very well at stopping networks existing, and it's actually more the classic rotten apple thing. All forces are quite good at denying that they don't have networks of corruption. Yeah. Only some of them are telling the truth. And so all the evidence is there. If you follow the news, and I suppose that's why I got interested in writing about police corruption, because I followed the news about those kinds of cases. And our police advisors are great because they don't have an agenda. They're incredibly frank with me about police corruption, and the two main ones are very dedicated officers who hate police corruption. They hate bent coppers. But what they don't do is deny that they exist. And sometimes when you encounter institutions, they deny corruption within their own ranks. And actually, you have to point to the police as being, generally speaking, an institution which does devote resources to rooting out corruption within their own ranks. And if you look at a lot of other institutions, they don't.
When it came to shoot, I mean, as a viewer, I wouldn't know what to look for, but what was important about shooting each season? What sort of instructions were you very clear about that you wanted? I don't know who to look to now because you've directed.
Jed, I mean, I've only directed a little bit. I'm what's called the showrunner, so I'm the executive producer who is in creative charge of the production during the production. So I'm working with the directors, with the cast, with the heads of department, and we're having an ongoing dialogue, which sometimes then feeds back to the production company, sometimes feeds back to the broadcaster, and that's my customary role on it.
But what became important as a way of doing things?
I think we set out, we knew we were working broadly within a sort of social realist palette,
Yeah.
but never losing sight of the thriller. And I think one of the things that really helped carry the thriller was the brilliant score we got from Carly Paradis, who was almost brand new to composing for television. And I think her score has become very recognisable and indeed much copied in different areas. But I think she brought something very fresh and very visceral to that score, and I think that really punched through on that first season. In terms of the way it's shot, handheld cameras, I often look at it in relation to, shows Jed has made, both with World and outside World, and shows that we as a production company made before then. But we didn't want it to get too wobbly cam, so that was something that we've probably phased out gradually over the 4 years, and we're probably a stellar show now. We shoot it perhaps a little more classically. We're more and more reliant on 2 cameras because it's a show that demands a huge amount of coverage because the devil is in the detail. So when we shoot those big interview scenes with Adrian, Martin and Vicky and the antagonist on the other side of the table, we've got 3 cameras going all the time, often turning over for half-hour takes. And everybody's word perfect, but you need all those shots to build the sequence within the edit.
How much rehearsal before?
Well, when a 30-page scene, it's quite a learn. And, you asked me earlier on about my glasses, of course. And, I decided early on that Ted wasn't going to wear glasses, which means I've got to learn everything. Whereas other people in the scene could possibly take a squint at a script, surreptitiously to find out what's coming up. So we have to learn them, and we get together and we have rehearsals. It takes the best part, a full day. It depends how many people are, either if there's only the one antagonist, if there's 2 people that side of the table and the 3 of us, 3 cameras, that's going to take a day to shoot, on 3 cameras, and everybody keeping their concentration. For the crews, it's really difficult. For us, it's difficult because you're driving the car really fast, and you have to keep the level of performance up. You can't let it drop. And then, but for the crews, they're not used to it. We're in a glass box, the lights on it, so they are pretty difficult to. How
long is one of those scenes, probably?
Well, we have done 25 minutes and takes, we're
really?
just, yeah.
30 pages of a script.
30 pages of a script, which is kind of unheard of, and in the industry, it's a kind of,
And would you have done that? Is that from the first series you'd have done that long?
Yeah, I think there's
12 minutes or something.
Yeah, it was 12 minutes in the first series, but there was a big decision taken on that scene, was that it would be continuous takes. I mean, I think early discussions with the director, and you'd probably look at other shows that have done this before us, a longer scene you would break into sections. So you'd shoot the first section, the second section, and the third section. It was Lenny James, I think, who said, no, we want to do it in one go, in whole takes. So
do you prefer that, Adrian?
Oh yeah, no, because you'll get a full, it's thought process.
Yeah.
So to break it a third of the way in and then pick it up again, you're just not going to get that flow, and the editor's not going to be the subtle gradations. The incremental shifts are going to be lost within all that. So to do it in one take is much, much better. Even though it's tougher, but it's much better.
I mean, to be honest, the arguments about shooting it in sections I don't know why anyone was even putting those forward. And
Right.
so, it was lucky that Lenny said that's the way he wanted to do it, so that those of us who wanted to do it that way could hide behind it. But having done long scenes in other shows, it's insane to break it into sections.
Yeah.
Okay. I've forgotten who wanted a clip. We've done them in a special order, and I've lost the piece of paper, which is the danger of having someone as old as me do this.
I want to show you the one about Lindsay
Good.
Denton.
Yeah. Shall we show it first, and then you?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
What do you want?
Yes, that's women, you see, and
You like a bit of
always
violence,
tidy
do you,
up
Priscilla?
afterwards. That's what's really nice.
This is the middle of the first episode, and she had had such a horrible time. She'd witnessed this horrendous ambush, seen her colleagues killed, been practically blamed for it by AC-12, and then she'd had her head flushed down the loo by her colleagues. And it was just appalling. You thought, this couldn't get any worse for this woman. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, you see what she's capable of. And the whole season was, did she or didn't she? But this is a brilliant moment, which is such a reversal, and I just thought it was tremendous. And her taking that wine bottle off and wiping her fingerprints was just fantastic.
Do you think, Jed, that's how tough women become if they've been in the police force?
Well, I think a number of questions have been framed in terms of gender difference, and I'm not really a big kind of believer in that. So, as a writer, I'm not thinking that's what a woman would do or that's what a man would do.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is a person who's pissed off with the neighbour's noise. And I'm not thinking what's the most kind of female-specific way of going about that. I'm thinking, what would any person do? And I think that, a lot of the things that motivate men and women are things that are hardwired into us as beings that have evolved over millions of years, and they're pretty much similar things. So I'm not hung up on that's a female way of behaving or that's a male way of behaving.
Except when she is in the sort of halfway home, when she's let out of prison and the social worker comes to help
Yes.
her and tries to do a deal with her to have sex. I mean, she's pretty tough then, isn't she? I mean, she's physically able.
Yes, she is. But she's also armed with the knowledge of how to go about that she films it, that she knows the law is behind her, and that isn't gender specific. I agree that a vulnerable woman in that situation with a man has a certainly is experiencing a different situational awareness in terms of the things that can happen. So, but again, that was a season where if you step back and look at the whole season, the antagonist in that, played by Daniel Mays, was a man who'd been sexually abused when he was vulnerable. So again, the subject was something that wasn't gender specific. It can happen to a man as much as it can happen to a woman.
But in fact, part of the joy of her was that you kept changing your mind about her because she was capable of looking after herself. and at other times you felt terribly sorry for her.
Yeah, and I think that was all part of the design, that we attempt to elicit sympathy, which then leads the audience towards wanting to believe she's innocent. And then other times we try and make her behave in a cold, quite dysfunctional way, which then alienates her from the audience. And certainly when we got to the end of the second season, the audience was divided in terms of whether she'd received her just desserts or not.
Well, she didn't in the end, did she? By the third season. Have you got a clip in season 3?
Yeah, I have, yeah. And it's something kind of further along the line in terms of the arc of the series. It's a scene involving Doc Cotton, who was such an important character for us across the first 3 seasons, and Lindsay again.
100 grand and you forget about all of this. That list included. All you have to do is forget about everything. All of this. Look, just take the money, you mad bitch, and stay out of it. What are you doing? Why don't you just take the money?
It's because I'm a police officer!
We are 2 feet apart in a confined space. Frankly, for you, this is a forensic ground zero.
Don't do that.
You had 4, 5 people killed and me framed. I expect you had Danny Waldron killed too. And never a single speck of blood on your hands. You want to shoot me? You go ahead. If it sends you to prison, that is my job done.
Do not send that message.
You're just a go-between. You're a weasel. Other people do your dirty work for you. Now you put that gun away. You take me to AC-12. Let's see what they will think when I bring you in. When I bring in the caddy.
No. No!
Who can tell me about casting? Because that, you know, the casting there is fantastic, isn't it? What's the process?
We hired at the very beginning a casting director called Kate Rhodes-James, who is one of the best in the business. Jed, I think you worked with her.
Yeah, I'd worked with her before, yeah.
And I knew of her, and I'd been keen to work with her. And she read the script, and she loved the script. And we would meet with her, and she makes suggestions, and we make suggestions, and it's a very sort of organic, evolutionary process, really. We saw quite a lot of actors for season 1.
What was the brief for Doc Cotton?
Well, initially Dot was a sort of secondary member or appeared to be, certainly in the early scripts, a secondary member of Tony Gates's serious crime unit.
Yeah.
And I'll leave Jed to say at what stage he was certain that he was going to be bent.
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time we cast, we knew that was the way the character went. You know, by that point of casting, we had the 5 episodes in pretty advanced states. So it was known that was the arc. So we wanted an actor who was very credible as a police officer, but also credible as being someone who could be a bit of a nasty piece of work on the quiet. And Craig was great. You know, when he auditioned, he understood the breadth of the character and was really interested in that. And you know, he's one of those actors who's got a really good sense of humour that he can bring to a character, which then helped really with the what we hoped was a surprising twist, that he seemed to be just one of the lads and he seemed to be just a regular guy. And then as we went through the 3 seasons, we get to see all kinds of different layers to him. And I think you kind of saw that in the clip. You saw a guy who is mixed up in bad stuff, but doesn't necessarily want to do bad things. He wants to bribe a police officer to stop himself having to kill a police officer. So, I mean, that's obviously a classic example of moral relativism, but he's not necessarily free to make those choices, and that's part of the looking for the tragedy and looking for the layers in these characters.
Well, that's why Keely's such good casting as well, because we generally kind of, we warm towards her as a person, and we don't want to believe necessarily, that she could be as dangerous an animal as she turned out to be.
Well, she's attractive, isn't she? She's very clever. I mean, I think that's very appealing, that she obviously knows what she's doing and she's very competent.
She's clever, but she's also socially awkward, so she tends to misjudge situations, which is why she doesn't really have any supportive relationships. She's like a borderline personality disorder, and so she, there are certain things that she said that Keely really enjoyed playing. I don't want to attack people; they just make me. It's that kind. That's a really messed up way of thinking, and you've been in prison. You've been tried twice. You've lied through your teeth to get out of prison. You've blamed someone for something they haven't done to get out of prison, and then you've got the gall to say you're not going to take a bung because you're a police officer. It actually works in terms of the character, because Keely knows that that's what the character sincerely believes. She sincerely believes she's an upstanding police officer. Yeah. So she says that line with all the emotional authority that it needs to have. And the audience believes it. And then they need to think afterwards, hang on. Yeah. And that's sort of the part of what we're attempting to do.
Adrian, do you worry that you're commissioned 2 more series, aren't you? Do you worry that it's your turn to be a bent copper?
Every morning. Every morning. Yeah, no, definitely, no, that is a worry. But I don't think Jed's going to get rid of Ted just yet.
Have you asked him?
Every day, yeah. Every time we meet, I said, we're okay, aren't we? No, I don't worry.
Because certainly the last series, the 2 youngsters are sort of not trusting him as much, are they? They're not trusting you in the way they had.
Yeah, by the time we got to the end of that, there's an ambiguity about what happened at the end of the last series, definitely, that allows us to spin off, and allows people to speculate where we might be going next in the next series. But, it could all come to nothing, all of that.
Because at the moment, the only bad thing about you really is that you're not a very good husband, isn't it?
Well, yeah, not a very good husband, not good with money.
No.
A bit socially awkward with women.
Yeah.
Not very good. And when I was on Woman's Hour, they absolutely loved me because, they all realised Ted's such an easy pushover for any woman, really, to kind of wrap around their finger, sort of thing. So, because of where he's at. He's at really, but yeah, no. Yeah, I do. Every day I worry that I'm going to...
Yeah. Well, I'll pray with you. Your favourite clip? Have you got a clip?
I have a clip. Yes, I have a clip from Series 4, I think, that clip. And this kind of goes into, you know, Jed is he's a bit of an expert in many fields. And the medical field is one. And so he comes up with these really Byzantine things that, you know, the rest of us go, really, could that happen? And yes, actually.
Because he's a qualified doctor, yeah?
If certain things come together, that could happen. And this is kind of what happens in this bit.
What are you doing? Just making sure everything's as it should be.
Why am I here?
Your husband wants to explain everything. I'll be back with an antibiotic injection.
How are you feeling?
Let's go home.
Rose, they had to operate.
I just want to go home.
Hey,
Just
listen,
wanna
listen,
go
calm down.
home.
No, you're going to hurt yourself, Rose. Just listen to me. The wound was very deep. The tissue was dead, and the infection had gotten into your bloodstream. They call it septic shock. If they didn't operate, you could have died. There's no choice.
Why didn't you stop them?
They had to operate to save your life, Rose.
Why didn't you stop them? What?
She's still very woozy, poor thing.
It's a lot to take in. No wonder.
Yeah.
Have you had experience of that situation?
Of that?
Yeah.
No.
Well,
No, I mean, the idea of people losing limbs because they're infected is obviously something that's established. So we took advice on that, and again, we kind of tracked her illness through.
I can't remember, how long did she carry on hiding her arm before?
It was really from beginning of episode 2, when she sort of appears
Quite a long
about
time,
10 minutes into the episode, and it's kind of like a revelation that she's still alive and kicking, and she's got a small wound which came from a struggle, and what happens then is that the wound becomes infected, and she conceals it because any kind of investigation into that would potentially incriminate her. So she conceals it until it's too late. So then she gets into a point where antibiotics can't arrest the progression to septic shock, and it's the septic shock that's going to kill her. It's not actually the lesion itself. It's the fact that it's infecting her bloodstream and she's going into shock. That's the source of the shock. So it needs to be eliminated.
I like the idea that the husband tells her, shh, in case she's making a fuss, having just learnt that she hasn't got an arm anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Well, I think there was also part of it that was constructed to make us believe he's got complicity. You know, when he says something like, oh, you know, she's still upset, she's still a bit woozy, the poor thing. It's kind of like really patronising, and it's the idea that maybe he quite liked the idea of her having her arm cut off. Yeah. And then that sort of then feeds into, which is what she accuses him of, because the trust has broken down in their relationship, and then they're just at each other's throats. So it was part of the construction, which was because she then attempts to get her revenge on him. That was the insult that prompts her course to revenge.
And also, if she'd taken a different path when she escaped from being sawn up,
yes,
she could have been saved all that. I mean, it was a momentary decision, wasn't it? That she...
Yeah, but as a police officer, she knows it's really, really hard to plead self-defence as an excuse for murder. I know that we've got some great legal minds in the audience, not more than 10 feet away from me. They'll probably correct me, Mr. Trafford, but
they'll have a chance in a minute.
There are some people who've really struggled to say that it was self-defence, and I think obviously as a police officer you stand more chance because generally they do succeed with that one. But because it's in a domestic situation, she's weighing up, do I run the risk of just, if I go for manslaughter in 3 years, then I've lost everything, I've lost my career. If I go on trial for murder saying self-defence and the jury takes against me, that's a mandatory life sentence. It's a really tough decision. And whether you make that decision in 3 minutes or you take a week, it's still a really hard decision.
She was a very different female, clever copper than the Keeley Hall's character.
Yeah, I think that she was fundamentally better educated, more of a leader. She had better relationships. You know, all those things where it had to be a contrast. You know, when we started talking about the character design, was that, well, she can't be a loner like Lindsay.
Yeah.
She has to have a family. She has to be someone who gets on well with her colleagues, both male and female. She has to be someone who's got the trust and respect of her bosses. All the things that isolated Keeley's character were things that didn't apply to Roz.
Adrian, as Ted Hastings, you weren't keen on this sort of woman, were you, as a police officer?
No, I wasn't keen on her at all. No, I thought she was far too pushy.
I want to show my favourite clip.
In many respects.
Are you proposing that I should have disregarded the powerful evidence against Michael Farmer and released a potentially dangerous offender back into the community?
No, that is not what we are talking about here, Detective Chief Inspector Huntley, as well you know. We're not mind readers. We don't know whether Michael Farmer is guilty or not. All that's expected of us as police officers is that we do our duty to the letter of the law. The letter. Now, you were a bit of a high flyer in your time, Roseanne, weren't you?
Graduate entrant, fast track for promotion, DI before you were 30.
Then you hit the wall.
I started a family, sir.
You stood still while other people kept climbing the ladder.
Operation Trapdoor is an extremely high-profile inquiry, and get a result will put your stalled career back on track.
You were under pressure, weren't you, Roseanne, to get a result?
No, sir.
Pressure from the top.
No, sir.
Come on. No movement for months. The press telling women the streets aren't safe. Come off it.
I discharged my duty correctly, and the matter is now in the hands of the courts.
The matter, DCI Huntley, is whether or not you knowingly and willingly hoodwinked the Crown prosecutor into authorising charges against Michael Farmer despite there being good reason to doubt his guilt.
I've got no doubt about Michael Farmer's guilt.
No.
Brilliant. Yeah. Simon, did moving to BBC One mean that you got a lorry load of more money than you'd had on BBC Two?
Well, I went back to the magic money tree, but no, it wasn't. It had gone. So
really?
Yeah. No, we didn't. No, we got a little bit more. I mean, in the end, I think the way the BBC finances drama is by tariffs that are set regardless of the channel that the drama ultimately appears on.
What about America? Have you sold it to America?
Yeah, we're on Hulu in America. I'd like to say we're as big as The Handmaid's Tale, but sadly we're not. We haven't quite taken fire there in the same way as we have here, but we're hopeful.
Who's showing it?
Hulu.
Okay.
Yeah, who are a big streaming service in the US. They're rivals to Netflix. They do Handmaid's Tale. They've got other original productions on.
And traditionally, how long would it take before you knew it was about to become mega? I mean, how many series in America?
Well, these days things can catch fire quite quickly. You know, we're in an era where UK programming can be on air the following night in the US, and certain British shows have caught fire in the US, and we're still, I guess we're a cult hit over there as opposed to, you know, a big recognised show in the way that we are in the UK.
And you've got, how far are you, Jed, with the next series?
I've written the first couple of episodes.
Okay.
They're very good.
It's good that you say that. And when will we see that?
Spring of next year.
Okay.
Yeah, early spring. Yeah.
And what's the big ambition now for Line of Duty?
Well, I don't know that we have a big ambition. I mean, we're very grateful to be in the position we're in. Feel very fortunate that we've got 2 further series commissioned. So I think that, you know, you've just got to, you know, play every game as it comes. You know, if at the end of the season you end up there in the run-in, then that's great. But I think you just have to concentrate on the work and getting the episodes in the best shape and getting the best cast and the best directors and editing it and getting it out there and hoping it carries on to connect with the audience.
And Simon, if you were to think of the one thing that has carried and helped with the success where other series with great writers, great directors, great actors has not managed what this has managed, what do you think you know, the thing that you feel is most important?
I think Jed's writing and his commitment to that writing, because he takes, you know, every season as seriously as the first season, you know, and there's an absolute commitment to the detail, and not just the writing, you know. As we talked about earlier, Jed's a showrunner in the US sense, and in a way that very few writers are in this country, where there's an attention to detail that starts with the writing but goes right through to the delivery of the show to the broadcaster, and he's involved at every stage. And I think you know, there are plenty of good shows which fade away when the writer loses interest or finds they want to go and write something else. And I think the fact that Jed has stayed absolutely and totally committed to Line of Duty has kept the standard of the show right up there.
Is it your most important piece of work?
Well, I don't know yet.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I'm going to open it to the audience now.
Good.
Can we take some questions, please? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Coleman. We're actually in the middle of pitching for a crime series ourselves, a TV drama, based in the coast and very much a Northern Ireland element. And I was wondering, I was very interested in your comment earlier on, where you said that the appetite that you had when you first started Line of Duty was not fantastic. I just was interested in whether that appetite has changed over the years, whether you thought that there was more of a scene for this kind of drama now.
Yeah, I think we're definitely in an era where a lot more drama is being made. There are a lot more opportunities. I think when we were thinking about where we would place Line of Duty, there are probably really 3 channels, because Sky were doing very little at that point either. So you've got all these new platforms. It's far easier to get across to America to reach European broadcasters, but equally the competition has never been fierce. There are more independent production companies around than there ever have been. Film producers moving into TV drama, Americans wanting to move into UK drama. So the 2 things in a way can balance themselves out. But I think the big difference is that I think most of the platforms I'm talking about, networks, see drama as driving the success of their channel. Whereas I think back in 2009, it was much more reality shows that were seen as driving the success of a channel, and drama was a bit of a lost leader, really.
Do you want to wait for the mic?
So I've got it here at the back, so I've stolen it. I'll pass it down in a minute. I'm Dean Webster, I'm a fan. I just wanted to ask a question about the writing process and about the planning process of the scripts. Obviously, there were lots of twists and turns, not just across each series, but, across all 4 of them. I wonder, how do you manage to make it all work and all stay believable, and there aren't any pitfalls across the series? And also, at what point during the 4 series that we've already seen, did you know that the Balaclava men were going to make a reappearance at the end? How premeditated was that?
It's kind of a mixture. I mean, some things are planned and some things are developed more organically. I mean, when we started, we had no idea that we would be in this fortunate position where we're going to have at least 6 seasons. And I think it would be really hard to try and plan something to that extent, not least because you have no guarantee that you're going to be able to stay on the air. So we do a little bit of looking ahead, but generally try and concentrate on the episode that we're working on, the season we're working on, and from that point look for connections to other things. Look, as the story moves forward, looking at ways that if we need the story direction to change, is that something that relates to possibly something that's happened in the past, or is it something that we can set up for the future? So it's a very organic process, and once you've reached the point of, as we are now, writing season 5, there's a hell of a lot that you can call upon. You've got such a diverse canvas that you can play with. So in that way, it's a very fortunate position to be in, and it's hard really to recollect what it was like with season 1. I think with season 1, it was fundamentally just tell the story, hope people watch it, hope we can get recommissioned.
Oh, good.
Yeah. You mentioned America, but this is a very European drama, isn't it? Have you actually sold it on the continent at all?
Yes. It's the sale to France was actually quite recently. I think it only happened after season 3 had aired. But other than that, it has sold to all European countries. And I think, Jed, it's very big in Scandinavia, isn't it? You've been asked over it a few times.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think it was big in Sweden one year and stuff. It's like
big in Japan.
That's right. Yeah.
Japan is big in Japan.
No, it's kind of. It's
very
like
big in Australia.
It's like at the end of Spinal Tap when they find out that Sex Farm's gone top 10 in Japan, and then they go on tour to Japan. It's like that. Every now and then we get a journalist phones up and says, "Can we have an interview?" Because like the Swedes are going mad for it. It's a bit like that. I mean, but in terms of real distribution, it's as we go forward and we accumulate more episodes, then potentially it makes it more attractive to sell into other territories, because then people have more that they can watch. We all know that those big American shows that have hundreds of episodes are just running endlessly on various networks, and so we don't have enough episodes to reach that. But as we do more, then we become something that maybe will be seen more widely.
Has that meant a huge financial difference to World Productions, this line of duty?
Well, I think any production company would want to see, a returning series on air.
But has it changed?
No, I don't think we're still the same company. We haven't all got 7 assistants, and we've got slightly better offices now, and it's enabled us to keep a solid core team together over a period of now 6 or 7 years. And a successful show for a broadcaster opens doors with that broadcaster and other broadcasters.
Has Adrian got a bigger dressing room now?
Not yet.
Not quite yet.
Soon.
Soon.
If you stay.
Yeah, that's exactly. Okay. Yeah, if we last.
Yeah.
Tara Conlan, I write for Guardian, RTS, among others. Could I ask you, Simon, you said that the Bee were broadly your first port of call, where the other ports were. But also, Jed, as well, the 4 seasons have had 2 very strong female characters that the audience has really connected with. You've got seasons 5 and 6. Can we expect to see another strong female lead like that again in either of those?
Maybe. Ports of call?
Ports of call, yeah. I mean, as with any idea, you discuss where the different places that you could go. But, you know, we, you know, as a company, and I think Jed's work as well, we tended to gravitate to the BBC. So it felt like the right home for it, even though the climate for drama generally wasn't brilliant at the time.
I think we were very lucky that there was the other platform. I mean, the BBC One did turn it down. So it was originally offered to BBC One, and the controller didn't think it would work on BBC One. And so we were very lucky that there was that opportunity. And obviously that wouldn't have existed at another network necessarily.
Where is that controller now?
I don't really want to say, because anybody who's got an iPhone in their pocket, it might explode.
I think, just to pick up on that though as well, I think BBC Two allowed the show to, you know, because a lot of people say, oh, it could have been on BBC One from the start. I don't think it could. I think it found its right home, and I think it was allowed to grow and be itself on BBC Two, and then we were ready to go on to BBC One.
Because you didn't have to have the ratings for BBC. You weren't judged as harshly.
No. In fact, you know, the first episode got about 3.5 million viewers, which was, you know, the best for BBC Two. It was the highest drama series.
The thing is, though, we don't know, because we were a ratings hit on BBC Two. So if we hadn't been a ratings hit, if you look at shows that haven't performed in the ratings, they're not on air. It's always about the ratings, no matter what anyone says.
Yeah. Next questions, please.
Hi. Jed, oh God, it's a bit loud. I'm just interested in the writing process. So when, say, the difference between writing the first few episodes to then going on and writing the later series, when you know who the cast is and you know how it's been received.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, in terms of the cast, when I first started writing, I had no idea who was going to play the roles, and so then as the actors slotted in, and I think Adrian was one of the first actually, weren't you?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and because when Adrian came in, the part was written in a different way. I hadn't imagined Adrian for the role. I mean, obviously now there isn't a writer in town who doesn't imagine Adrian for a role in their work, but we just started talking about the character's history, and we realised that it would be a great collaboration. And so when Adrian very generously agreed to be in it, we then started looking at the specific backstory and the way he would talk. And then when Lenny joined, that had an effect as well, because the character had no ethnic specificity in the script, and so we decided that it wasn't a colourblind world. You know, it was a sophisticated police drama, and what we couldn't do is just say it was the same for every officer, and so that introduced that. And now that I'm kind of writing a lot of the time for actors established in the role, it's very easy to kind of hear them saying the lines. But obviously each season introduces new characters, and we have to go through the same process again.
Hi, I've got another question about the writing. With Netflix, obviously getting used to series being released in kind of one batch, so you can watch a series as quickly as you like. And I wonder whether kind of the writing, the way that you reveal the twists and turns for a series, whether you think that would have changed at all if you'd known that your kind of one series was released at one time?
No, I don't think it would. I know what you're saying. It seems that patterns of viewing are much more diverse than they used to be. But you still have to achieve the same thing, which is to make the audience want to watch the next episode. So whether they can do that by being so paralysed that they can't stop the next episode automatically loading so fast that you don't even see the end credits, or you have to wait a week. It's still the same relationship with the audience, and I think that what's possibly distinctive about Line of Duty is that because we have quite dense storytelling and a lot of twists and turns, we're now in an age of social media which allows that kind of conversation to propagate. So a lot of people are talking about the show and their stake in the story in the week in between episodes. And that's something that I think that we've harnessed, and certainly the broadcaster has harnessed. And we do see a pattern of viewing that is really interesting, which is that the live audience tends to build. So as we go through a season, more and more people choose to watch the episode as it goes out rather than watch it on catch-up. And we think that they do that because they don't want to be left out of the conversation. So when we get to the season finale, normally our overnight audience is a substantial proportion of our total audience.
What have ITV put up against you to try and catch up with? Like, is there anything that's worried you when the schedules have come out?
Yeah, Love Island.
Yeah, I mean,
That's your viewing habits, Adrian.
Got a lot of BAFTAs. It did well in the BAFTAs.
Yes, it did. Yes, they got a BAFTA, we didn't. It's true.
Well, there's a way that you could look at the way that we've performed that suggests that it's really about the strength of the competition. You could actually argue that we've been completely passive and people don't like the programme, it's just they hate what's on the other side. And you could do that for any analysis. I mean, the significant things were that season 2 we opened against the I always say the 100th anniversary episode, but it was the 100th episode of Midsummer Murders, and that really harmed our opening audience. Yeah, it took about 1 million off what we were predicted to get, and then the audience built over the course of the series. So what you had was a very pleasing looking set of metrics that made it look like the audience was developing a stronger and stronger attachment to Line of Duty. But
and you were still against Midsummer?
No, other things came on.
Oh, I see, okay.
So, but it could have been that just that the opposition got weaker. And then in the other one was, I suppose we were directly against Vera for season 4, where it's crime drama versus crime drama. And also Vera started early, and also because the people who write broadcast don't understand viewers, what they write is Vera had a bigger audience because they count in the +1 audience, whereas we don't get a +1 audience. So in terms of direct competition, we did slightly better than Vera, but the figures were reported the other way around. But then when Vera stopped, we then started to build. So again, you might argue that it's strength of opposition rather than the strength of the show intrinsically.
Is there an age? What's the demographic like?
It got younger when we went on to BBC One, interestingly. Yeah. And I think that was part of moving to that channel. It has a slightly younger demographic anyway, the BBC Two, and also the way the show was publicised and marketed helped to bring in a younger audience who maybe wouldn't have necessarily watched a BBC Two cop show.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Hello. I understand that, Jed, you run quite a positive set, and I wondered if that was something you actively pursue, and if you think that's made a difference to the kind of community and kind of feeling of the cast and crew?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm glad that my tyranny has been kept secret.
That's a brilliant PR work you've got going on.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, I do. I mean, I come from a background of having been a writer on set almost as a guest, and the things that really bothered me about that experience were the times when people weren't being collaborative, where they didn't want to discuss the work, they wanted to make unilateral autocratic decisions to prove that they were geniuses, rather than allow their thinking to be examined, and so that we could all decide that we're doing this because this is what we want it to be, and having the opportunity to be on set and have those conversations means that if people are thinking, well, maybe we don't say this line or we do it this way, then I can be there to be part of that conversation. And a lot of the time, all I'll say is, well, my intention here was this. And then once people know that, then we can talk about it. Because what I think is frustrating for a lot of writers is that there's nobody on set saying what the writer's intention was. Everybody's looking at it saying, well, what does this line mean? It makes no sense to me. I'm going to change it. And if the writer was there, they could say, well, that's a significant line because it resonates with a scene that your character isn't in. And the actor doesn't know that. And the director has forgotten that. And the script editor never even clocked it, or whatever it is. So if you can have those conversations going, then it just fosters a spirit that everybody's collaborating. And I think that that's just important. The other thing I think about my role is that the informality, that if it's hard for people to talk to me because I'm not around, then they'll end up having a higher and higher threshold for speaking to me, and generally they won't. Whereas if I'm on the set a lot and I'm just, shooting the breeze and we're talking about the football between takes, or there's a relight and we go and have a cup of coffee and we talk about the episodes and how it's coming together in the edit, then people will then start to talk and ask questions, and that then pervades the whole cast and crew.
Do you think there'll be a movie version, and if so, would it work as a movie?
Ted's Excellent Adventure, something like that.
You've been rehearsing that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I can see it now. Me and Neil Morrissey.
No. No, we're a television programme, and the idea of it being a film doesn't make any sense.
Has it allowed you, Adrian, to do much else while this has been on?
Yes, I've been able to do a lot of stuff. I do a lot of highbrow stuff, as Jed calls it. I go off and direct Beckett and Friel and work, with Seamus Heaney and T.S. Eliot's poetry and do all that kind of stuff.
No, you were reading some poetry out the other night, you were saying.
I was. Last night we were reading some Seamus Heaney at the Bloomsbury Hotel. It was very nice. Yeah, it was a lovely evening.
Does Jed come along to
He doesn't know. He's too much of
No, I don't know. I've been having
he's
trouble sleeping.
He's too gammon and pineapple for all that, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Hi, I'm slightly interested how you were able to sell the roles to both Daniel Mays for Series 3 and to Jason Watkins for Series 4, where ultimately they were probably doing as much marketing and PR for the show as they were actually in the show itself. I guess that's slightly different to the majority of roles that you look to cast on.
Yeah, I think that if actors are proud of the work that they've done, and they also have the kind of personality type, which means that they wish their productions well, then they'll support them. So both those actors were actors that we knew in terms of their work and knew them as people. So we knew that they'd be very supportive of it, and we're always very grateful for that. And in the industry, there are always kind of whispers about certain actors who are rubbish for doing publicity, and you kind of try and avoid them.
Are you good at it, publicity?
Publicity?
Yeah.
He's never out the papers.
Oh, honestly, yeah, that's right. TV's Adrian Dunbar, they call me now.
Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, just one more over here. So, thinking about production cost, taking away the margin, are you able to say how much each episode cost to make and how that increased series 1, 2, 3, and 4? I don't need a spreadsheet, but any guidance you can give would be great. Thank you.
No, because the BBC attacked me if I'm
I'm
not allowed to say.
The BBC has a blanket instruction, which is that you don't reveal budgets.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's gone up. All drama costs have gone up over the last 7 years. And I'd still say we are incredibly good value.
And also in answer to your question as well, of course, you don't get Danny Mays and Jason Watkins unless the role is really good. unless there's, that they think there's something there that they can really do something with, albeit just for one episode. I mean, it was an absolute tour de force by both of them, and they both knew that, and we also knew that it'd be a huge shock when they disappeared. And so, well done them for taking it on. We're really grateful for that kind of caliber of actor coming in, doing something like that. But I'd say it's got to be really good for them to do it.
There's somebody in the middle here.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say I binge watched the episodes over Christmas, and I had to watch the next one, even though I knew what was going to happen. So that's some credit to the writing. But I was wondering if you had any pushback from the BBC about the long interview scenes, whether they actually ever asked you to shorten them.
No, never have done. No, I mean the BBC have been incredibly supportive right from the beginning. There's always going to be moments where there's a discussion about a particular decision, but I think we've been very fortunate in being backed for the show that we are, and nobody's ever tried to, particularly in that first season, tried to turn us into a show that we're not.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think we've all had experiences of working with broadcasters where they haven't backed the vision for the show. So we're not just saying that. If they were giving us a hard time, we would say, but they're not. They're great. They're incredibly supportive, and I've certainly not had that level of support from a broadcaster before in my career. I think it's fantastic.
Yes.
You have some amazing scenes in a lot of them, and I just wondered if you ever sit there and think, do you know, this twist or this big scene, I'm thinking of when Doc Cotton, he pressed on, he was in the interrogation suite, and then the armed police fired and he escaped. Have you ever had a moment where you've had to think, is the audience really going to buy this?
Well, I think as part of the process, you obviously try and balance a twist against between its unpredictability and its plausibility, and sometimes those things are directly proportional. The reason that something's unpredictable is because it's implausible. So we're always trying to find that balance, and often it's just an instinct that what we need here is a dramatic choice. That particular sequence could have ended with Doc being wrapped more and more in his own lies, and that's the way it works. So we could have carried on playing it as a kind of psychological dialogue-led piece, but there was also a feeling that certain things needed to have a finality, and the actual reason to project the characters out into a situation of very real jeopardy was that we didn't want to have a situation where Dot's story was left open. That what we'd done in series 2 at the end of with Lindsay Denton, some of the audience had found the ending too open, even though she'd gone through due legal process and been convicted and sentenced. The audience didn't feel that was closure in the way that they did with Tandy's character in 4, and I think there are quite complex reasons for that, and I think I've figured out what they are. But in terms of Doc, I didn't want him to have to then go through some kind of legal process, because we're not the kind of show that disinvents the criminal justice system so that someone can just be clapped in a handcuff and then it's Buckham murder 1 and that's it. They have to go through a process. So that was the reason for that, and then worked back to create a scenario where, rather like in the car scene with Lindsay, Dot is pushed into a narrower and narrower range of options for his character, to the point where he does something absolutely precipitous.
Time is running out. One more question.
Hi. I know you've been commissioned for season 6 as well, but do you think you have enough in you to do a season 7 if it was commissioned? Or do you think the arc will come to a natural close?
Well, at this point we don't know. What we've all said is that We're focusing on season 5. When season 5 goes out, following that there'll be a conversation with the BBC, which I think will largely depend on how season 5 performs. And I think if it does very well and the current regime remains as supportive as they are, then I think that there'll be an opportunity to discuss a season 7. I think if for whatever reason those two situations don't apply, then I think almost certainly season 6 would be the last. But in terms of those of us within the show, we're really happy that it's ongoing, and I don't think any of us at this point is looking to wrap it up.
I think, you know, and one of the things, maybe it's not unique to Line of Duty, but we're not, you know, we've never been pressured to be on air every year. So we get a break from the show, we go away and do other things, and then we come back to record the next album. You know, it's sort of, it feels quite fresh. Every time we sit down to do each series, it doesn't feel like, Christ, we've only just finished the last series, we've got to get the next series on air. And I think it always feels like we come back and the actors as well, you know.
Absolutely. And like doing season 5, you know, the first couple of episodes, it feels like it's very fresh territory.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, oh God, we're doing that again. It honestly feels like these are things that we haven't done before, characters we haven't seen before, and that I think is part of the construction of the series, that it has that architecture which allows us to rejuvenate the format. And you know, I'm possibly we've kind of arrived at that accidentally, but it does appear now that we have this situation where the audience becomes intrigued about what we've got to offer based on who the guest lead is going to be and what character there are and what the fundamental premise is. And we've been very fortunate that as the series has gone on, people have engaged with every new story.
I think what's wonderful about it is that you make it look so effortless, and that any of us could sit here and do the same thing.
Thanks, Dan.
Simon, thank you. Priscilla, thank you. Adrian, thank you. Jed, thank you. What a fantastic evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.